Okay guys, today we're going to talk about rules for operations with integers, and we're talking about addition and subtraction in this video. We'll talk about multiplication and division in just a few minutes on another video. The thing that you have to remember is that adding and subtracting integers is actually harder than multiplying and dividing integers, and that seems kind of strange because it was easier for you to add and subtract when you first learned how to do it than it was to multiply and divide. But when you throw integers in there, it gets a little bit difficult. So first of all, this is the easiest part. When you're adding, the sum of two positive integers is positive. You learned that when you were in kindergarten or first grade. 2 plus 2 is 4. A positive integer 2, another positive integer 2 equals a positive sum of 4. That one's easy. Gets a little bit trickier when you do the sum of two negative integers. The sum of two negative integers is negative. So if I have negative 3 plus negative 3, it's really negative 6. And what I want you to remember, a little trick, is when you add a negative, it's the same thing as subtracting a positive. And that's something that you will hear over and over. Adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting a positive. And what I mean by that is if I have negative 3 minus 3, I also get negative 6 for my answer. So adding a negative, the same thing as subtracting a positive. And an easy way that you can remember this is if you think of talking in terms of temperature or money. If you borrow $3 from someone and then later on in the week you borrow another $3 from that same person, how many dollars do you owe them? Well, you owe them $6, or you are $6 in debt. You have negative $6. Even though it's not really possible to have negative $6, it's basically an IOU. You still owe that person $6. So adding a negative, same thing as subtracting a positive. That's one of the rules that you need to keep in your head. Next one's a little bit trickier. The sum of a positive and a negative integer. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to find the absolute value of each integer. And remember, we talked about absolute value just means distance. If the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. So you're going to find the absolute value of the integers and subtract the values. So even though it says sum up here, we are going to subtract the values. The negative sign goes with the higher absolute value. So whichever number has the higher absolute value, that's the one that is going to dictate whether your answer is positive or negative. So if I have negative 3 minus negative 2, I'm going to find the absolute value of negative 3, which is 3. I'm going to find the absolute value of negative 2, which is 2. And I have 3 minus 2, and that equals 1. Another way that you can remember that is if you have two negative symbols together, that would be the same thing as a positive. Now let me give you another example here, because that was actually two negative integers. Let me give you one that is a positive and a negative. If I have negative 3 plus 2, because that would be the sum of a positive and a negative, I'm going to find the absolute value of each one of those. Absolute value of negative 3 is 3, but I'm going to subtract the absolute value of 2. Alright, 3 minus 2 is 1, and the number with the greater absolute value tells me if it's positive or negative. 3 is greater than 2, and 3 was negative in our original problem, so that's going to tell me that my answer is going to be negative. So if I owe someone $3 and I pay them back $2 of that, how much do I owe them still? I owe them $1. So it's a little tricky to think about that. Think about it in terms of money. Think about it in terms of temperature going down and then raising, and that may help you keep it straight in your head. The last one is subtracting integers. We did an example of that a second ago. This is another rule that will help you remember. To subtract an integer, add its opposite. So if I have negative 3 and I'm subtracting 2, I'm going to add its opposite. Well, if I owe someone $3, let me pan down a little bit. If I owe someone $3 and then I borrow another $2, how much do I owe them? I owe them $5, or negative 5 is my answer. But if I add its opposite, adding the opposite of 2, because this is really a positive 2 here, even though that subtraction sign is there. We don't normally put the positive sign on integers. If there's no sign, we assume that it's positive. If there's a negative sign, then we assume that it's negative. So if I'm going to add the opposite, if I have negative 3, I'm going to add negative 2. So to subtract an integer, add its opposite. The opposite would be adding negative 2. Negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5. I get the exact same answer. So if you want to remember the rule, or if you want to think of it in terms of money, either of those things work. You may need to watch this video a time or two to help you out. These are tricky rules, especially when it comes to subtracting integers. Do your best on that. I've got some practice problems that I would like you to try. The practice for tonight, I have 4 problems. Negative 8 plus 7. Negative 6 plus negative 3. 4 minus 7. And negative 2 minus 5. So try those, see what you get for an answer. You can always double check it on your calculator if you want to know the answers right away. If not, we will check this on Thursday, August the 16th.